Hey guys, today I've got a treat for you. I have been asked by GamerzClass to basically watch Nikobaby's Dota 2 carry course on their website and give an honest review, good or bad, about how I feel about the course. And so I've taken the time to watch all these videos. I will say that the coolest thing about Dota, especially when you're listening to high level players talk, is how their perspective on the game can result in similar answers, but they ask themselves different questions. And I really liked the way he approached a lot of this course because it's similar to my way of teaching, at least, not to like pat my own back. But he talked a lot about the questions you ask yourself in the game and a lot about the mindset behind once you know the right questions, how do I come to the right answers? And when you're in the middle of the game, some questions may be so difficult to answer that you just have to go by feel, and your feel has to guide you. And I thought that was really cool. And so I'm going to be taking some time to talk about mainly the good things I saw in this course and some of the bad. There were a few things I think could have been a bit better approached, but overall, I think this course is really good. Make sure you check out the link below to sign up for GamerzClass. It's $10 if you want to check out this course specifically. I will say after watching it, I think it's a lot more than $10 worth. And I think almost maybe oversharing from Nikobaby in regards to giving a lot of insight that I myself, as an 8.5K player, learned a thing or two, maybe even 5 or 6.
Banana slam jam.
So we're going to go through the videos kind of just one at a time, a little bit of a brief talk on every video. So he talks about drafting as a carry player. And some of the cool things I thought he highlighted was that, yes, the carry matchup matters a lot, but when you think about picking carries that are good against supports, say supports that would force you to buy, you get BKB, and you can pick Lifestealer. It's effectively maybe not the best matchup for Lifestealer in the carry role, like whatever the carry may be, but you have that extra item that you would have normally had to buy on any other carry. So certain matchups may be swayed by the fact that your hero's kit basically gives you a free item in that specific game. Thought that was a really cool concept I had never specifically thought about. In the meta itself, there's certain popular items, and also certain items are good against certain heroes, and drafting heroes that want to build those items can naturally make the hero more enticing for that specific game. One thing I really liked about his laning video was that he talked about basically, if you like the lane, why not just make the laning stage longer? What heroes in the game like the laning stage to be longer? If the opponent likes it to be longer, why don't you make it shorter? These are the things I thought were really cool. He was talking about how certain heroes like longer stages or shorter stages, how you can kind of read those heroes, and basically what you can do to extend the laning stage or shorten it. And to hear more about his exact perspective, you'll obviously have to watch these videos. He talks about going into the game with the pick itself, knowing based on the opponents he's seen, what items he wants to buy on the lane, whether or not he's going to deal with the big camps or not, whether or not he's going to contest the rune. He said explicitly, all these things are decided pre-game. He knows these things going into the game.
To know these things before the game starts even. So, because let's say you start losing the lane, you don't want to be thinking in the game like, what's my next move? You want to have it already in your mind. You want to be prepared for the move. So when it comes, when the right time comes, you don't waste time, you just go for it.
That was exactly what I was talking about. Where he's like, whether or not the game goes right or goes wrong, I know with my pick going into the game, I've already thought about it. And by the moment it happens, it's already too late if you haven't considered the outcome. And I think that's so important as a part of drafting and a part of laning, and I'm really happy he highlighted it. So I've talked to people about whether or not their lane, they can go jungle as carries. And he talks about as a carry, I've always said that it's important to defend your tower, but he basically treats the catapult as somewhat strict rule for when you can leave the lane. Like, you're not allowed to leave the lane early enough that the catapult can kill your tower. So his whole idea is make sure you don't leave the lane before the catapult's dead, and everything you do in your power has to be able to kill that catapult. I always thought in this basic way, protect your tower. He's saying that if you leave the enemy catapult alive when you actually go jungle, you're basically giving up your tower. So I thought that was a really cool, like, specific guideline to give to newer players or even more advanced players about how, like, I say defend your tower. He says do this specific thing that will always lead to defending your tower.
You just want to fight them. The moment you feel you're a bit stronger than them, you just go for it.
I thought what is so cool for him was that he talked about how creeps take less priority in lane, and it's more about whether or not you want to fight them, and if you want to fight them, the creeps come next. If you don't want to fight them, then you're prioritizing the creeps until you want to fight them. You're playing more defensively with aggro and all that kind of stuff. But his emphasis was this comes in little power spikes and massive power spikes. And every little time you have an advantage, you force a fight. Whether or not that's a simple 1 or 2 auto attacks, or whether or not that's a full-on kill attempt. His emphasis for like transitioning out of the lane to me was really cool. He basically said, I always say like you want to take the most aggressive farm on the map if you're a carry. But he said specifically, you want to be annoying. And I was like, oh. So basically, whatever you're doing is affecting the opponent. And I always thought of it as pressure. He thinks of it as being annoying. The opponent doesn't want you to do that. They don't want to deal with you doing that coming out of the laning phase. And I thought that was a really cool way to look at the same problem, and it might help others really identify with how to do that. This was resounding message he said throughout the course, was how your entire thought process needs to be molded to your team and the opponent heroes. As a carry, I think we're taught to be selfish players, and I've tried to emphasize more of a team approach, but he goes to the whole next level where every single decision he makes is dependent upon what his team needs. If his team wants to pressure, he takes the shitty farm and just sucks it up. If his team wants to play passively, he goes and plays aggressively and takes that farm. It decides where you farm. It decides how you lane. When it comes to the lane, everything you do, you want your support to be free. He talks about the power of double waving. He talks about the power of the pull camps. He talks about every decision he makes is in order to enable his support to do whatever they want. And I thought that was so cool as a carry player, because everything we've taught as a carry player is we are the center of the universe, the world revolves around us. But he says, no, what can I do in my power to make the game easier for my teammates? And I think support players like to have that excuse, my cores flame me if I try to play support properly. And I think carry players have this excuse that, if I don't carry the game 1v5, I'm not going to win. And he's going completely against that notion almost throughout this entire course. And I just think that that's such an important message to preach from somebody of his caliber. I adored his repetition of that concept. One critique I had on the course itself was that the carry matchup portion didn't talk about any specific matchups. It more so talked about matchups in the game for carries. It was a bit misleading. It says carry matchups you're expecting, is Lifestealer good against Spectre? Is Terrorblade good against PL? But it more so talks about like what games are good for what carries and what situations you'd want to pick a specific type of hero, which I think is relevant information, but I do think the title itself was a bit misleading. His mentality to the game, I think, is probably one of the most important videos in this entire course. The right mentality, you see it here. It's a pretty short video amongst all the other ones. He basically says, carries tend to expect to have a free game. They expect to be babysat. They expect to have a good start. But he talks about having this mentality that you're not always going to have a good start. Learn what to do in rough spots rather than complaining. Don't go AFK. You're still expected to pressure as much as you possibly can. Be useful to your team, even if that's just by taking the shitty farm. He really emphasizes making the best of a bad situation rather than trying to create the best situation when it's not actually possible. Some games, you're just not meant to win your lane. And he always talks about doing the right things consistently, the small little things, and don't feel forced. If you feel like that's all you can do with your hero, then do it and repeat it until you feel like some opportunity presents itself. I think the mentality he has is very calming. A lot of carry players I've coached feel forced to do things. They feel very pressured. And he talks a lot about that mentality, about like how you can approach that so that you don't feel too panicked to try to make too much happen or play too passively. When he talks about transitioning out of laning, he talks about how when he's farming or when he's doing something that's not pressuring, he's thinking about the next moment he's going to pressure. That at 8 minutes, he's thinking about that 10-minute catapult. He's thinking that if I'm not doing something, the next moment, when am I doing something? If I'm not leaving lane yet, when am I leaving lane? Is that a specific timing? Is that a specific hero coming to my lane? He talks about specific scenarios and questions to ask yourself in this whole transitioning out of the laning phase. And I think it's exactly how I like to teach, and I love the way he even asks unique questions that I've never thought of to myself. He talks a lot about baiting spells when it comes to like team fighting and transitioning into the mid game. And I think the emphasis that he talks about helps a lot with once you know your limits. But a brief critique I kind of had on this is he didn't really talk about how to learn your limits. He didn't talk about anything more than just playing. And I think playing is a way to learn your limits, but I do think there are questions you can ask yourself to better learn your own limits, and he mainly talked about what to do once you know the limits. So it's funny that his enabling your team carry video and enabling your team as a carry video is one of the shortest. His entire course reiterates this message constantly. He basically talks about, what's the most valuable space for a given hero to farm? What are my options? Could I go top? Could I go bottom? If I have several different options, then I have to base it off of my teammates. A lot of supports will say, I'm not going to pull because my carry's not going to adjust properly. He emphasizes that if you think your offlaner is better suited in the safe lane, then you take his lane or you offer to take his lane if you know you can do either. And if the guy says, nah, screw off, I don't want to do that, at least you tried to do the right thing. Don't stop communicating what you think the right thing is when it comes to where you farm on the map just because you don't think your teammates are good and will capitalize on it. At least trying to communicate that is a big deal. And if it works 2 out of 5 times, 2 out of 10 times, whatever, that's that many more times that you're going to be farming the right place on the map. And that's a lot about, okay, if I can farm anywhere, if one of my teammates would ideally farm somewhere, I'm going to take the one that they don't want. Selfless way to think about carry, but it is so important if you want to take being carry to the next level. He's willing to give himself a shittier game. He's willing to die for objectives or willing to die to protect objectives if he's the hero on his team that recovers the best. If he's a Sven that can farm jungle, if he's a Wraith King that farms jungle. He talked about recovering a lot as farming jungle. So if he has an offlane Queen of Pain, which he used as an example as the snowballing hero, he's willing to take a hit in the first 5 to 10 minutes on his farming speed such that his offlaner doesn't have to do it. And I thought that was so cool. Which hero recovers the best? And if it's you, be willing to take some sacrifices early on in the game. I've always talked about pressuring the enemy to react to what you're doing in terms of pushing a tower. I thought what was really cool is that when he was Morphling, a super survivable carry, he talked about pressuring the opponent to pressure you. Taking the most dangerous farm on the map as a way to pressure the opponent because they don't want you to be able to farm it. They think, oh, that lane's super dangerous. Nobody on the enemy team should be allowed to farm it. And he takes that type of farm on heroes that are capable of doing it, even if it's slightly less efficient, because it creates this pressure on the opponent team to deal with him. He talks about constantly farming in a way that makes the opponent want to go where you are. That's what the coolest part about it is. He's saying, yes, I'm farming, but I'm not making my team play 4v5. And he just has a different way of expressing the whole don't make yourself an AFK carry. And the way he communicates it is very unique. And honestly, you'd have to watch the entire course for yourself to see it. But I was convinced towards the end, to be honest. In every video, he talked about lanes. He talked about pushing lanes better than the opponent. I couldn't agree more. And I want you guys to understand that pushing lanes is a tough concept. And oftentimes you feel forced to take objectives. You feel forced to shut down enemy heroes that are trying to farm. And he talks so much about how the lane setup, whether or not the lanes are pushed in favor of your team, is crucial for you to do the other things. If you want to pressure the enemy ancients, that top lane and mid lane have to both be pushed. He uses examples like this where every piece of information he derives is from the state of the lanes. And I thought that was just such a simple way for people to see, and it's very tangible. He made this concept very tangible for players of my caliber, but I also think of players of newer to the game.
So when you get edges and when you feel strong, you want to push the most dangerous spot in the map, because this way you're gonna kick out everyone who's been there already.
He talks about how if the area is the most dangerous, it's oftentimes the place that the opponent wants to play. And if you're super strong, the best thing you can do is go to the most dangerous part of the map, learning your limits that way, and basically kicking them out of the place they want to be. If you think you're strong enough to occupy that, it is just that much more important, because every little move you make that takes space on the map from the team is just winning the resource battle. He talks so much about how people think Dota is all about these massive team fights, these massive wins, but how so many games are decided by these decisions around the map, the right lane to pressure, the right area to take from the opponent. Are they a Roshing team so you control that area? Are they an Ancient team so you control that area? He talks so much about how specific heroes handle different parts of the map differently, and how every part of the map means something different to him as a carry player, and basically based on his own strength he decides where he would want to play. Not only did he talk about how making your teammates be allowed to do whatever they want, he talked about supports being able to do in the laning stage. If you take the most dangerous farm on the map, it allows your team to rotate. If you clear all the waves, it gives your team more information to operate on the map. But he also talks about how if you're losing, what do the opponent heroes want to be doing, and try to force them to go somewhere they don't want to be. If they want to be pressuring, try to force them to come back to your own towers. If they want to play playing defensive, invade their areas. That's the kind of cool thing I really thought about. He talks so much about other people's perspectives in the game at a whole nother level than I've honestly ever heard anyone talk about. Discussion about my items in terms of greed level are decided by how my teammates' games are is so important for carry players to hear because they just don't think that way. And I think it's super important that someone of his caliber talks that way. The emphasis I really love throughout this course is he didn't tell you, like, this is the answer to this. This is how you win Dota. He said, these are the types of things you need to think about every single game. And so what I liked so much about this course, mainly as a final thought, would be that he's teaching you how to fish. He's not giving you a fish with this course. I was impressed with his ability to basically talk about his inner monologue during the game, like express exactly this is the inner monologue he has to himself. But then he also says which parts of that inner monologue are important to communicate to the rest of your team because it affects them as well.
So how I became like the player I am right now is not just by playing mindlessly in game after game after game, but also by theory crafting, like copying even other players. What I used to do is I used to copy professional players, copy their builds until I realized what they're doing and until I started like understanding what exactly is happening. One thing to remember as well is that you're gonna lose so many games, and I lost so many games, and this is the only way you can improve.
For me, I think a lot of people view the short term. I think that's not just Dota, but it's just a common philosophy within individuals. And throughout this course, he does talk, like this is his final summary, his wrap up of the course. But he just talks about doing the consistent thing right in the middle of a Dota game. He talks about having the right mindset consistently such that in the long term you improve. And I don't think it's a surprise that this guy, in my opinion, kind of came out of nowhere. And now he's a top tier carry on one of the best teams in the world. His overall mentality is so important to listen to. The way he thinks about Dota, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think you guys will too. So definitely check it out if you're interested in learning much more about carry. And honestly, he talks a lot about supports in his video as well. So if you're a 5 position, you might even enjoy hearing what carries think, but also what they want from you and what they can do for you. Because as a 5 position, I think it's super important to know these things. And I also think it's super important that you're on the same page as your carries such that you guys can play off each other. Because he talks so much about playing off of your team and basically combining your 5 heroes' capabilities to their maximum potential rather than just being as efficient as possible on your 1 hero.